It happened on an ordinary evening, the kind where the house should have felt warm and familiar. I was sitting at the edge of the sofa, my hands folded in my lap, listening to my son argue with his wife about something trivial. I didn't mean to step in, but I thought, just maybe, I could calm the tension. I offered a gentle suggestion, something small, something a mother says out of love. That's when he turned to me. His face was tight, his eyes sharp, his voice sharper still. "You're too old to matter," he said. At first, I thought I had misheard him. My ears rang, my chest tightened. Surely my son, my baby boy, the child I once held against my chest through sleepless nights, couldn't have meant those words for me. But the silence that followed told me he had. His wife smirked, and he stood there unflinching. The room grew heavy. I couldn't move. My hands trembled as though every sacrifice I had ever made, every sleepless night and aching day, had been tossed back into my face like nothing more than dust. I wanted to shout. I wanted to remind him of the girl I once was, the mother who worked double shifts, who sold her wedding jewelry to buy his school books, who bent her back just to see him smile. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, all I managed was a whisper. Too old to matter? My voice cracked, but he didn't flinch. He didn't take it back. His wife looked at me as though I were some piece of old furniture taking up space. My own son turned away, dismissing me with a wave of his hand, as if I were nothing. I sat there frozen, but my mind raced back through the years. I saw myself in the tiny kitchen of our first home, stirring a pot of soup made from scraps because that was all we had. I saw the nights I stayed awake, sewing clothes from old fabric so he'd never feel ashamed at school. I saw myself clapping from the back row at his graduation, my heart bursting with pride, even though my shoes were so worn they had holes at the soles. And now? To him, I was nothing. The silence in that room was deafening. My heart screamed, but I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I swallowed the lump in my throat, lifted my chin ever so slightly, and walked out. My steps were slow, heavy, but each one carried a truth I hadn't yet spoken. Inside me, something shifted. The woman who had given everything had finally reached her breaking point. If my son truly believed I was too old to matter, then perhaps it was time I reminded him just how much power I still held. That night, alone in my room, I let the tears come. They burned, rolling hot against skin that had aged with sacrifice. My pillow caught the sobs I refused to share with anyone else. But even in my grief, a seed was planted. A quiet fire began to burn. He thought my years had weakened me. He thought my silence was defeat. But he was wrong. My silence was the beginning of something he could never predict, because a mother's love may bend, but when it breaks, it can become something far stronger. And though he didn't know it, the moment those cruel words left his lips was the moment everything began to change. That night after my son's cruel words, I couldn't sleep. My heart was heavy, and my mind kept pulling me back to the life I had lived. The years when I was not just his mother, but his shield, his provider, his entire world. I remembered the beginning when I was still young, still carrying the glow of newlywed dreams. Life had other plans, though. My husband was taken from me far too soon, leaving me with a child in my arms and a mountain of responsibilities I didn't yet know how to climb. I was barely in my 20s, but overnight, I became mother and father, protector and provider. I can still see myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror in those days, eyes swollen from crying, lips trembling, but forcing myself to smile before stepping into my son's room. Because no matter how broken I felt, he deserved to see only warmth when he looked at me. The sacrifices began quietly at first. Small things. I'd go without new shoes so he could have fresh ones for school. I'd eat less at dinner so his plate would always look full. But as the years rolled on, the sacrifices grew heavier, harder, and more relentless. I worked long shifts at a diner, my back aching, my feet blistered. At night, I'd take home sewing work, patching together clothes for neighbors to earn a few extra dollars. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, a single dim light overhead, while he slept peacefully in the next room. My fingers would bleed from the needle pricks, but I'd keep going, because tomorrow he needed lunch money, and I wasn't going to let him go hungry. When he grew older, the needs grew too. School trips, uniforms, tuition fees. I remember pawning the last piece of jewelry I had from my own mother, gold bangles she had given me on my wedding day. I held them close to my chest that final night, kissed them, and whispered, "Mama, forgive me. I need to do this for your grandson." Then I walked into that pawn shop and traded memories for survival. But oh, the joy it gave me when I saw the smile on his face when he came home with good grades, when his teachers told me he was bright, full of potential. In those moments, every ache in my body felt worth it. I thought, this is what it means to be a mother, to give and give and give again. Yet there were nights when the silence pressed too hard on my chest. Nights when loneliness crept in. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, whispering to myself that one day he would grow up and understand. One day he would look at me not just as his mother, but as the woman who built his entire world brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. I think of the winters most of all. How I wore the same thin coat year after year so he could have the newest one to keep him warm. I can still feel the cold seeping into my bones, but I never complained. I told myself, a little cold is nothing as long as he's safe. And the summers too, when I would stand in long lines at discount stores, clutching coupons, piecing together enough supplies so he would walk into school looking just as polished as the other children. I didn't want him to feel less than anyone. I wanted him to walk tall, even if it meant I walked home with tired legs and empty pockets. I poured everything I had into him. Every dream I couldn't chase for myself, I placed gently into his hands. I never thought of it as a burden. I thought of it as love. Pure, unshakable love. And now, years later, those words, too old to matter, echoed louder than ever in my ears. It was as if all those sacrifices had vanished from his memory, erased like chalk from a board. I lay awake that night, staring into the dark, realizing something that cut deeper than his insult. It wasn't just that he had forgotten what I had done for him. It was that he had never truly seen me at all. And with that thought, my heart hardened just a little more. The seed of resolve I felt earlier, it began to grow roots. Because if my son couldn't remember the years of sacrifice that built his future, then perhaps it was time I reminded him, not with words, but with actions he could never forget. As I lay there in the dark, memories kept unraveling like a reel of film I couldn't stop. I thought about all the ways I had built his future with my bare hands, brick by brick, never once thinking of myself. When he started school, I was the mother who never missed a parent-teacher meeting, even if it meant rushing from a double shift with grease stains still on my uniform. I sat in those small chairs, exhausted, but smiling proudly as the teachers praised his sharp mind. I would nod politely, all the while praying they never saw the truth, that my bills were overdue, that my hands ached from scrubbing dishes until my skin cracked. And then came high school, the years when money seemed to vanish faster than I could earn it. Sports fees, new clothes, textbooks that cost more than I made in a week. I did everything. I cut corners, skipped meals, and picked up side jobs nobody else wanted. I remember cleaning offices late at night, walking home under flickering street lights, clutching my coat tighter because the streets were never safe at that hour. But every step I took, I told myself, this is for him. One day, he will rise above this life. When he was accepted into college, I thought my heart would burst with pride. I can still see him holding that letter in his hands, grinning ear to ear. He had made it. We had made it. But the joy was quickly shadowed by reality, the tuition fees, the endless expenses. I couldn't let him feel the weight of it. So I bore it alone. I took out loans in my name, debts that would follow me for years. I pawned the last of my jewelry, the small treasures I had left from my wedding. I told him not to worry, that I had it covered. And he believed me, because he had never seen the nights I stayed up calculating how to stretch a single paycheck across rent, food, and tuition. There's one memory that lingers stronger than the rest. It was his first day on campus. I carried his bags up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken. My arms burned, my back screamed in pain. But when I saw him standing there in his new dorm room, smiling like the world had finally opened its doors for him, I felt nothing but pride. He hugged me quickly, distracted, already eager to meet his new friends. And as I walked back down those stairs alone, I whispered to myself, "It's worth it. Every second of it is worth it." I worked harder than ever those years, sending him money for meals, for books, even for little luxuries so he wouldn't feel out of place among his peers. I told myself he needed to fit in, to belong. I wanted him to hold his head high, never once feeling the shame of poverty that I had carried for so long. And when he graduated, when I stood in the crowd with my old camera snapping pictures, I felt tears sting my eyes. He was in his cap and gown, shaking hands with professors, walking across that stage like a man ready to conquer the world. That day, I thought I had finally done it. I had given him the wings to fly, but even then, I noticed the change. His eyes searched for his friends before they searched for me. His words of thanks were rushed, as though my years of sacrifice were just footnotes in his story. I ignored it then, convincing myself it was the excitement of the moment. But deep down, I felt the first quiet crack in the bond I thought was unbreakable. And now, as I replayed those memories in the present, I realized something chilling. All those bricks I had laid for him, every sacrifice, every debt, every tear, had built not just his future, but his arrogance. And the foundation of that arrogance was me. I thought the distance I felt after his graduation was just the natural space children take when they grow older. I told myself he would find his way back, that no matter where life took him, a mother's love was the anchor that would steady him. But then, she came into his life. At first, I welcomed her with open arms. She was polite, soft-spoken, with a smile that seemed warm enough. I wanted to believe she would love him as much as I had, that she would stand by his side as he built the future I had sacrificed everything for. I even cooked her favorite meals, offered her the chair of honor at family dinners, and treated her as the daughter I never had. But slowly, her mask began to slip. It started with small things, whispers I wasn't meant to hear, a sigh when I gave advice, a tight smile when I joined conversations, a subtle roll of her eyes when my son wasn't looking. I told myself I was imagining it, that maybe I was too sensitive. But the unease in my heart kept growing. Then came the comments. Soft at first, like needles slipped into silk. Maybe you shouldn't eat that. It's not good for your blood pressure. You're always fussing. Let us handle things now. You really should think about moving into a smaller place. This house is too much for someone your age. Each word carried a weight heavier than the last, but I kept quiet. I told myself she was young, she didn't understand yet. Surely, with time, she would learn to respect me. But I was wrong. The more influence she gained over my son, the colder he became. He stopped calling me just to talk. He stopped asking how I was. Instead, every conversation was filtered through her. If I suggested something, she would counter it. If I offered advice, she would dismiss it. And slowly, he began to mirror her tone. One evening still burns in my memory. We were sitting at the dinner table, and I offered a simple blessing over the meal, as I had done my entire life. She looked at me and said, half joking but sharp enough to sting, "That's a bit old-fashioned, don't you think?" My son laughed. He laughed at me, as though I were some silly relic from the past. I forced a smile, But inside, my heart cracked. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just a wife. She was a wedge driving my son further and further from me. Soon, she began planting seeds in his mind. Your mother should downsize. She can't manage this house anymore. She spends too much money on little things. What if that cuts into our future? You need to start thinking about what's yours, what's ours. I heard these whispers, not because they said them to my face, but because walls in a home carry sound. I would pass by the hallway and catch fragments of conversations. I would see the way his expression shifted, the way his loyalty swayed, and every time I tried to remind him of the bond we once had, she was there, reminding him instead that he owed me nothing, that I had already lived my life, that my time was over. It was like watching a storm gather on the horizon, knowing it was coming straight for me but powerless to stop it. My son, the boy who once clung to me when he had nightmares, was slipping through my fingers, replaced by a man who looked at me as though I were a burden. And deep down, I knew she was the one pulling the strings. Still, I told myself, hold on a little longer. Surely he will remember. Surely he will see me again, not as an inconvenience, but as the mother who gave him everything. But instead, he only grew colder, and I would soon learn just how deep her influence ran. It happened on a night that should have been peaceful. The house was quiet except for the sound of rain tapping against the windows. I had spent the afternoon cooking a meal I knew they both liked, trying, once again, to bridge the growing distance. I set the table, placed everything neatly, and waited for them to come home. But when they walked in, the air was already heavy. I could tell by the way they looked at each other, sharp glances and tightened lips, that an argument had been simmering between them long before they opened my front door. I stayed silent, hoping the warmth of the meal would soften the mood. But as we sat down, the tension thickened. She criticized the food. Too salty, too heavy, not healthy for modern diets, she said. My son laughed at her joke, not even looking at me, and my heart sank. I swallowed hard, tried to change the subject. I asked him how work was going, if he'd thought about the promotion he had mentioned months ago. He barely lifted his eyes from his plate. It's fine, Mom. We've got it handled. We. That one word stung. I tried again, carefully because a mother never stops trying. You know, I said softly, if you're saving for a house, maybe I can help. This place has enough room, and when I'm gone... That was when she cut me off, sharp, cold. When you're gone? Honestly, maybe it's time you started thinking about what comes next. For us. Her words hung in the air like a knife. My fork slipped from my fingers and clattered against the plate. I looked at my son, hoping, praying, that he would correct her, that he would defend me. But instead, he leaned back in his chair and sighed as though he had been waiting for this moment. Mom, he said, his tone heavy with irritation. You're too old to matter in these decisions. You've had your life. It's our turn now. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The rain outside seemed to stop, the walls closed in, and my heart felt like it had shattered into 1,000 pieces. Too old to matter? I whispered, my voice barely audible. He didn't take it back. He didn't soften. Instead, he waved his hand dismissively as though brushing me aside. You don't need to stress yourself. We'll handle everything, just stay out of it. His wife smirked, leaning closer to him, her hand on his arm, as if sealing their alliance against me. The silence that followed was unbearable. My chest tightened, my throat burned with unshed tears, but I refused to let them see me break. I sat there staring at the boy I had once carried in my arms, the boy whose laughter had once been my entire world. Now, he was a man who looked at me like I was nothing but an obstacle. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Not in rage, but in clarity. I rose from the table, my chair scraping against the floor. My legs trembled, but I stood tall. I see, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. I see where I stand now. He looked at me with impatience. as though I were making a scene. His wife smirked again. I turned and walked out of the dining room, each step heavy, each breath sharp in my chest. Behind me, I heard them continue their conversation as if nothing had happened, as if my pain were invisible. In the solitude of my room, I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to steady the storm inside me. His words echoed over and over, "Too old to matter." Too old to matter? But in that echo, something else began to grow. A resolve I had never known before. For the first time, I saw the truth with crystal clarity. If he truly believed I was too old to matter, then it was time to show him just how much I still did. Because a mother may bend, but she does not break. And this mother was about to take back everything he thought was his. That night, after the words that broke me, I sat alone in the stillness of my room. The rain had stopped, but inside me the storm raged on. I stared at the old photo on my nightstand. My son as a little boy, his tiny arms wrapped around my neck, his smile so pure it once made every sacrifice worth it. I touched the frame with trembling fingers and whispered, "Where did you go, my child? Where did I lose you?" The ache in my chest was unbearable, but slowly, something began to shift. I wiped my tears, sat up straight, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt awake. If my son thought I was too old to matter, then it was time I showed him just how wrong he was. I began in silence. I didn't lash out, didn't confront him, didn't let him see the fire that had started burning inside me. No, my silence would become my weapon. The next morning, while they went about their usual routines, I quietly pulled out the old lockbox I kept at the back of my closet. Inside were deeds, bank papers, and letters I hadn't looked at in years. My hands moved carefully, deliberately, as though each piece of paper was another brick of power I was taking back. I read through the mortgage documents, the savings accounts, the title to the house they assumed would one day be theirs. Every page reminded me, none of this was his. It was mine. Built by my hands, my sweat, my endless sacrifices, and in that realization, I felt strength. I called an old family friend, Mr. Harris, a lawyer I had known for decades. He had seen me through hard times before. When he picked up, his voice was warm but tinged with concern. "It's been a long time," he said. I swallowed hard, then replied, "I need to make some changes. Quiet ones." We met in his office the following week. I sat across from him, the weight of years pressing down on me, but I held my chin high. "I want to revise my will," I told him. "And I want to secure everything that's in my name." He studied me carefully, then nodded. "You've finally had enough, haven't you?" I didn't answer with words. I simply let the silence speak. Over the next few weeks, I moved like a shadow in my own home. While my son and his wife carried on, smug and entitled, I was making calls, signing papers, shifting accounts. I transferred funds into places they didn't know existed. I secured my assets so tightly that not a single penny could be touched without my say. At night, when they laughed together in the living room, probably imagining the future they would inherit, I sat quietly in my room smiling to myself. They had no idea. The woman they thought was too old, too weak, too insignificant was rewriting the entire story beneath their feet. One evening, as I locked away the final stack of documents, I caught my reflection in the mirror. For the first time in years, I didn't see just an aging woman. I saw strength. I saw a survivor. I saw someone who had been underestimated, pushed aside, and dismissed, and who was about to rise again. The beauty of silence is that no one sees it coming. They didn't notice the small smile that lingered on my lips when they walked past me. They didn't hear the thoughts racing through my mind as they mocked me, dismissed me, or treated me like a shadow in my own home. But soon, they would. Because my silence wasn't surrender. It was preparation. And when the time came, my revenge would not be loud. It would be devastating. The morning it happened, the house was unusually quiet. The air itself seemed heavy, as if it knew what was coming. My son sat at the dining table, scrolling through his phone, while his wife tapped her nails impatiently against her coffee cup. I stood at the doorway, clutching the envelope I had been holding onto for weeks. "Sit down," I said, my voice steady. For once, he actually looked up at me. There was a flicker of annoyance in his eyes, as though I had disturbed something far more important than his own mother. Still, he leaned back in his chair, smirking. "What now, Mom? Another guilt trip about how much you've done for me?" His wife chuckled softly, a cruel sound that grated against my skin. I walked to the table and set the envelope down between them. "Open it," I told him. He frowned, but curiosity got the better of him. He tore the seal and began to read. At first, his eyes moved casually, but then they froze. His smirk faded. His posture stiffened. The color drained from his face. "What is this?" he demanded, voice sharp. "It's the truth," I said. "Every deed, every account, every asset you assumed would one day be yours, secured, rewritten, placed beyond your reach. You will inherit nothing, not this house, not my savings, not a single thing." His wife snatched the papers from his hands, scanning through them, her face twisting with disbelief. "This can't be legal," she hissed. "Oh, it's legal," I replied calmly. "Very legal. And very final." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the sound of my son's breathing. Short, shallow, as if the walls were closing in around him. Finally, he slammed his fist against the table, making the coffee cups rattle. "After everything I've done for you," I laughed. The sound surprised even me. "Everything you've done for me? Tell me, what have you done except take? Except belittle me? Except strip me of dignity every chance you got?" My voice rose, trembling with years of buried pain. "I built this life. I built you. And when you grew strong enough, you used that strength to turn me into nothing. But I am not nothing. And today, you learn that." His wife tried to step in, venom dripping from her words. "You're bitter, old, jealous. You'll regret this." I turned to her, meeting her eyes with a calmness that startled her into silence. "No, my dear, you will regret this, because you thought you could take what I bled for. You thought you could erase me from my own son's heart. But the truth is, you erased yourselves. All I did was make it official." My son's face crumpled, fury and desperation fighting for space in his expression. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. And it wasn't the fear of losing me. It was the fear of losing what he thought was his by right. I stood tall, straighter than I had in years. "You told me I was too old to matter. Today, you see how much I matter. And when I leave this table, I leave with my head held high, while you sit here with nothing but your arrogance." And with that, I turned and walked away. Behind me, I could hear the sound of his world shattering, papers rustling, his voice breaking, her sharp whispers of panic. But I didn't stop. For the first time in decades, I wasn't carrying the weight of their expectations. I was free. The days that followed were strangely quiet. For years, my home had been filled with tension. The sharp remarks, the heavy silences, the air thick with unspoken resentment. But now, there was peace. A silence not born of fear, but of freedom. I woke each morning with the sun streaming through the curtains, not to the sound of their arguments, but to the gentle rustle of leaves outside my window. The weight that had lived on my chest for so long was gone. And for the first time in decades, I could breathe without wondering how to survive another day under my own roof. Of course, my son and his wife didn't vanish overnight. They tried. Oh, how they tried. Angry phone calls, desperate messages, even tears that once would have broken me. But I didn't flinch. Their pleas weren't about love or reconciliation. They were about loss, the loss of control, the loss of what they thought was guaranteed. They weren't mourning me. They were mourning their entitlement. One afternoon, he came to the house, pounding on the door until his fists went raw. "Mom, please. "You can't do this to me. I'm your son," he shouted. I stood on the other side of the door, my hand resting against the cool wood. For a moment, the years tugged at me, whispering memories of his first steps, his laughter, the nights I stayed awake with him when fevers burned his little body. But then I remembered the words he had thrown at me like knives. "You're too old to matter." I didn't open the door. Instead, I whispered into the quiet, "I did this because I am your mother, because you needed to learn that cruelty has consequences." Then I turned away, letting the echo of his pounding fade into silence. In time, the visits stopped. The calls grew fewer, and eventually they disappeared altogether. I imagine they found someone else to lean on, someone else to drain. But it was no longer me. What surprised me most was not their absence, but what filled its place. My neighbors, who had always smiled politely from afar, began to knock on my door. They brought meals, offered rides, invited me to gatherings. I realized how much of life I had shut out, too focused on carrying a burden that was never mine alone. Slowly, I stepped into a world that felt alive again. I joined a book club. I took up gardening, watching roses bloom in the yard I once thought I might lose. And sometimes, in the quiet evenings, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun dip low, and I thought to myself, this is what it means to reclaim a life. I had been told I was too old to matter, yet here I was, finding joy, laughter, and purpose in places I had long forgotten to look. Justice hadn't come from anger or shouting. It had come from action, quiet, steady, deliberate action that reminded me of my own worth. My revenge wasn't in watching them suffer. It was in watching myself rise. And as I closed the final chapter of that painful part of my life, I didn't feel bitterness. I felt peace. Because in the end, I hadn't just taken back what was mine. I had taken back myself. And that, more than anything, was the sweetest justice of all.